Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alex Marlow, Editor-in-Chief of Breitbart News. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to the first event in what will no doubt be a series of policy discussions with the paper of record in the Donald Trump administration, Breitbart News. For the most comprehensive and accurate information, you guys all know where to go. It's Breitbart.com. And I know you know where to go because I've been looking at our numbers, and we've been on a bit of a heater lately. So thank you, all of you in the audience. Just pulling some of our social media stats. We're beating all of our legacy media competitors combined. And it's all thanks to people like you in this room. And thanks to people like Secretary Burgum and Matt Boyle, who'll be doing the interview. We'll be talking about them in a minute. And this is going to be a huge day for us because after this, Matt and I are headed to the White House. We're going to be interviewing the President of the United States. So it should be a very busy news day over at Breitbart.com. So everyone, please stay tuned for more. If you're not familiar with me, I was the first employee of Breitbart News just over 17 years ago. I met Andrew Breitbart at an event for conservatives when I was a UC Berkeley student, and he sold me on this concept that the culture's upstream of politics. It was almost as if he had predicted that maybe one day a reality TV star could take over the world. It's kind of a prescient vision for Andrew. And I've been the editor-in-chief for 11 years, and I've had this amazing life where I've got to write books and host talk shows and have countless conversations with the most interesting people in the world, like ones you're about to witness right now. One person in the audience that I want to thank who was integral to that vision was Larry Solov, who is our CEO and president. He was Andrew Breitbart's lifelong best friend, and about 18 years ago, Andrew sold Larry on the vision of departnering from his law firm with the humble ambition of starting a media empire and changing the world. How do you think they did? I think pretty good, right? Pretty good, right? Yeah. So Andrew stood for many things, but I think above all, it was the free and open exchange of ideas. So Larry, of course, has been integral to that and maintaining that vision for Breitbart. But another person who's been huge in this regard has been Matt Boyle, who is our Washington bureau chief. So this week in Semaphore, Matt was compared to Peter Baker of the New York Times for his access to Trump's White House. And I can confidently say that is an outrage. Matt's sources are much better than anyone at the New York Times. There's no doubt about that. And one thing Matt has done, he's taken it upon himself, he's trying to talk to every single cabinet secretary, the vice president and the president. He wants to talk to all the biggest names in the country at the moment. I think he's set a goal by the summer, something crazy like that. But this is the first time he's done one of these major interviews in front of a live audience. So thank you all of you for being here for this. So now let me speak a minute about our featured guest today, U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum. It's a highly consequential time for our country, and the president's stated goals of rebuilding and innovating our industrial base. In order to do that, we're going to need energy. It's going to be the main subject today. And understanding that our resources should be used for the people, rather than keeping them in the ground at the behest of the radical environmentalists. So between the private sector experience that he has as a tech executive and being the chief executive of North Dakota, Secretary Burgum has the ideal resume and background for this particular moment. So I know personally I can't wait to hear what he has to share with all of you today. And finally, I'd like to thank our terrific partners and sponsors, CGCN and the Alpha Institute. And I'd like a big thank you to the sponsor of the event, American Clean Power. Thank you very much. The event would not have happened without them. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring up Breitbart's Washington bureau chief, Matt Boyle, and the Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum.
Yeah, thank you. Here, I'm going to go on this side here. So, Mr. Secretary, really want to thank you for taking the time here to join us. And first off, thank you to everybody here in our audience, our partners, and our sponsors for putting on this event. We're really excited as a news organization, as Alex mentioned. Later today, we're going to be going to interview President Trump in the Oval Office. So exciting time for us as a news organization, and I know it's an exciting time for our country too. So one of the first things I wanted to talk with you about, we'll go pretty broad, and then we'll get into some of the specific issues. But President Trump established just a few weeks ago the National Energy Dominance Council. He named you as chair of this. That's a massively expanded role for the Interior Secretary. Explain for us, what is a National Energy Dominance Council? What is it going to do? And what have you guys already done, and what do you have on the horizon?
Well, happy to do that, but first let me say good morning and gratitude to you, Matt, and everybody at Breitbart. It's fantastic you're doing this. Great to be here, and appreciate the opportunity to help get the word out about all the great things that are going on. But on the National Energy Dominance Council, think of it as a tiger team. It's a small group of people. It's within the White House, and so it's part of the executive office branch. And I'll tell you what we're not. What we're not is a group that's going to be doing white papers on permitting reform or doing research. Think of us like a tiger team. Think of us like a supercharged governor's economic development team. So if there's a project that is important to national security, is important to our country, is important to the president, then our job is to go get that project built. And that can be linear infrastructure like pipelines. It can be natural gas export transmission lines or export facilities. It could be any source of power that we need to help us achieve our objectives. And who comprises the National Energy Dominance Council? Well, in addition to myself, we have fantastic best energy secretary ever, Chris Wright. I think he's the first energy secretary that's actually come from the energy industry. So that's an interesting new twist. But he's got background in geothermal, nuclear, all the important work that our national labs do in energy. He's the vice chair of this group. And then we have about 2/3 of the cabinet. So it's an internal group of people. And the idea that President Trump had was that if there's a project that needs to be done, it's been hung up in years of permitting, he comes to this group, and then we've got the people that can either advance that project or the people that might have gotten in the way of a project in the past administrations. They're all in one spot. We can all move very quickly to drive things forward. And then the objectives are pretty simple. Is we want to sell energy to our friends and allies so that they don't have to be dependent on our adversaries. We want to help end conflicts abroad that are being funded by energy sales. And then at home, we want to generate more energy to help just the affordability, lower inflation, and we need to generate more electricity specifically to win a very important AI arms race with China. So we've got some broad objectives, and if we accomplish all of that, I mean, it's going to help bring prosperity at home and peace abroad. That's our highest level mission.
Mm-hmm. There's a million things I want to follow up on there, particularly AI and China and the electricity. But particularly, can you lay out for us? I know we've talked about this in the past during the campaign. I remember in the last couple of years about just how important energy is. I was just with Secretary Bessent last week at the Treasury Department, and he was mentioning how important energy is to literally every facet of the American economy. So when we're talking about, obviously President Trump has declared war on inflation. He wants to bring it down. He wants to bring prices down. Energy is a major part of this, and that's what the Secretary Bessent was telling me. So talk to us about just how important it is that we actually get this going, the American energy sector again, after what seems like a 4-year hiatus in terms of the broader American economy.
Well, it is an actual fact, Matt, and I think not every American sees it every day, but there's energy component in everything you do. The food that you eat, there was energy that was required to produce that. The clothes that you wear had an energy component. If you're any form of transportation, land, sea, or air, you're using energy. If you're on a computer, you're using energy. I mean, it just touches everything we do. So it's not a sector of the economy. It's the fundamental foundation for all sectors of the economy. And if we either raise the price and lower the reliability and the the stability of where that power is coming from, then that builds a factor into the economy where the prices all go up. And if you look at where countries have risen and fallen over a long history, or where empires have been built, the places where there's been long-term success is where they have affordable, reliable, low-cost energy. That brings manufacturing, that brings jobs, brings stability, it brings a stronger economy, it brings a higher GDP, it brings the ability to be able to fund and project power. So energy is key to the economy, and it's key to national security, those two things. President Trump understands that, and that's why he's got a very focused mission for us, and that is in some ways 180 degrees opposite of the last administration, which was actually had a whole of government approach that was attacking U.S. energy. NEDC, National Energy Dominance Council, our job is to reverse some of those directions, head the other way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now there's a lot of American energy resources in this country that are untapped, right? Whether it's natural gas, oil, whether it's coal. There's also a lot of minerals in this country and other resources in this country that are just not being used, not being tapped. You've been talking about this lately about getting these onto what you're calling the national balance sheet. Can you explain that for us? What is a national balance sheet, and what's out there that we're not using?
Well, America's balance sheet is massive, but I would say that most Americans, you get through a 4-year election cycle, even if you're not a huge student of politics, you've heard more than once or twice or 10 times that we have $36.5 trillion of debt. I mean, it's in advertisements. We hear it. And I would invite anybody here from the media side is do what I did when I was going through my Senate hearings, and when I would, first time I lived or worked in DC, was anybody I met that was in a position of authority or experience, I said, what's our debt? $36.5 trillion. What are our assets? I mean, I challenge anybody to go try to find a current balance sheet for the United States of America. And if you come up with one, it might be some financial assets. But I can tell you, as the head of Interior, where we have, just in Interior, we've got 500 million acres of surface. Brooke Rollins has another 200 million in the U.S. Forest Service and U.S. grasslands. So 700 million acres of surface. There's 700 million acres of subsurface that we have, the mineral rights, critical minerals, oil and gas, metallurgical and thermal coal resources. And there's 2.5 billion acres of offshore, many of which have not been even explored, all of which represent huge assets for us. So if you take our forests, our lands, our grasslands, our lands that are near urban areas, our mineral resources, our offshore resources, I think the number is what? Is it double, triple what our national debt is? It could be 100 trillion. And as I've talked with Scott Besson, if we had published our balance sheet, or America's balance sheet, and said, our assets are triple what our debt is, that just announcement might lower the 10-year rate on interest rates, because people say, wow, these guys got it covered, and they have a plan on how they're going to be able to pay down this debt, and they're actually in really good shape. So it's important that we do that. We did this in North Dakota. When I stepped in, there wasn't a balance sheet there either, and we went out and figured out, hey, what are the land assets? What are the mineral assets? What are all the assets that were owned, the public lands owned by the state? And when we have that balance sheet, then there's so many things we could do. Make all of your jobs more interesting, because then when President Biden says, hey, in the last week in office, I'm going to take 625 million acres of offshore, and by executive order, I'm just going to strike this thing and say, we're never going to develop them. We're never going to even go, and in the fine print, we can't even go map and see what resources there. We've just taken off a third of the equivalent of the lower 48, and we're just like, poof, it's gone. No one wrote an article that said that we just, evaporated like $10 trillion of your children and your children's assets, because those public lands, offshore, onshore, subsurface, those are for the benefit and the use of the American people. It's not like not every acre is a wilderness area or national park. That's a very small portion of it. The last best places, we can preserve all of those and do even a better job of preserving them. But the assets that we have, they were put away. Theodore Roosevelt literally said these are for the benefit and the use of the American people. And if Interior was a hedge fund, it would have the largest balance sheet in the world. I mean, it would dwarf even like Saudi Aramco. And then you would say, hey, as a shareholder, should I buy stock in Interior? And then you look at the revenue that we produced in the last year, which was only $18 billion off of trillions of dollars of assets, and you'd say, this is the worst performing hedge fund in the world. I mean, how in the world? I mean, anybody ought to be able to get a bigger return than that. So we can take care of the air, the water, or the land, the wildlife. We can do all of that, and we can get a better return for the American public, and it's part of how we're going to balance the budget. Cut $1 trillion of expenses, add $1 trillion of revenue, balance the budget. It's like what anybody would do in doing a turnaround. It's actually not that hard, and we're on a pretty good start.
Mm-hmm. So everybody is familiar with the phrase "drill, baby, drill," right? But there are 3 other babies we got to talk about. We got to talk about map, baby, map, right? Mine, baby, mine, and build, baby, build. Can you explain how these 4 concepts go together in terms of getting that stuff out of these federal lands and resources onto the balance sheet, into the revenue stream for the country?
Well, I'll start with drill, baby, drill. When we have public and federal lands, there's required by law the auctions, and the federal government is required to hold an auction so private sector people can bid and say, hey, there's an area of acreage that is now eligible to be bid on for mineral development, let's say oil and gas. And those auctions happen, the private sector companies come in, they bid on that, and when they win the bid, they write a check up front to the Treasury. Boom, dollars come in. I mean, I think in the last weeks of Trump's first administration, just the state of New Mexico pulled in $900 million from lease sales, the state, and then the federal government gets a big chunk of that. So these are really significant things. In North Dakota, during my time as governor, which just ended on December 15th, we were engaged in a lawsuit the entire Biden term because the federal government wasn't holding leases that they were required by law to hold. I mean, every president since Harry Truman had held the quarterly lease sales. And so after 2 years of foot dragging, we finally said, we got to take him to court. We went to court, we fought for 2 years, we won, and the federal judge said to the Biden administration, the law says you must hold lease sales, so you need to hold the lease sales. And the Biden administration decided to appeal. It was just black and white. They're breaking the law, and then they appeal. So it's like this is the frustration that I had as a governor in a resource state where we had the cleanest air, the cleanest water, and the best soil health, and we were producing things, and we wanted to send checks to the Treasury. If you allow us to develop, we will send you a check. And with horizontal drilling in North Dakota, as it is now, the technology that's happening in the whole world, I mean, everybody thinks fracking is a horrible, horrible word. I mean, it is. Just when you hear that word, think of like something that's even more amazing than the latest technology. The Bakken is, we were the nation in 2007, which was on our path to becoming the most dependent on oil and gas imports. We were a net importer of oil and gas. Today, we're the largest producer in the world, and it all came from a technological revolution called the shale revolution. This is not the oil and gas industry. It's not like if you really have a history of film. It's not like some Rock Hudson movie from the 50s where there's just black and white movie. There's oil spewing anyway. If you're younger, it's not Daniel Day-Lewis. There Will Be Blood. Where there's just like oil everywhere. I was in my first year as governor, and I'm in a drill shack in the Bakken, trying to understand how a 30-foot strip, 10,000 feet underground, could be developed into a liquid. I mean, a strip that is hard as the streets that you're driving on here, actually harder. They go down 2 miles, they turn a corner, and they go 2 miles, and they stay in a 30-foot strip. At 10,000 feet underground, that's 1/3 of 1% tolerance, and they stay in it for 2 miles. And I'm like, how do you possibly do it? And a 25-year-old kid in a white lab coat surrounded by computers in a place that is spotless, and there's not a drop of oil anywhere on the entire site, says, well, sir, if your house was 2 miles down and 2 miles over, I could drill the lockout in the front door. And then last year in North Dakota, 75% of the permits were 3-mile laterals, 2 miles down, 3 miles over. So now I got a piece of federal land. Over here on private land, I go down. I don't touch a leaf. I don't touch a frog, a bird, anything. And I send the federal government a check, and they weren't letting us do that. So part of why I jumped into this whole national thing was we just had to get some common sense back to what we're doing. So the drill, baby, drill is not like, oh, they're going to end up with drilling rigs surrounding Old Faithful. No, again, remember, 700 million acres of federal land. I mean, something like 7% of that is national parks. We can protect any acre, we can make bigger parks, we can do all that, and we can do both. This is a time of abundance, so we have to get going again. And people say, oh, but Secretary Burgum, didn't you just say that we've got record output? Isn't this contrary? Well, the reason we've got record output today is not because of anything what the Biden administration did. It's in spite of what they did. The reason why we have high output today is because lease sales were being held right up through the 4 years of President Trump. We are headed towards a time when we're going to have a decline potentially because no lease sales were being held. And it takes a while for the private sector to develop that. So when President Trump summarized this beautifully in 3 words: drill, baby, drill. We got to do all the things, the permitting, we got to get back in the game, we got to encourage private sector capital to come to our country versus go to overseas projects, to come back here to make sure we do that, and we have to get the regulations out of the way so this industry can keep innovating.
So one of the things I'm hearing from you too is a big focus on clean energy, on being protective of the environment. We've talked with Administrator Zeldin about this a lot as well. The Republican Party and conservatives are the party of conservation, right? Like, and we saw the direction that the radical left went during the previous administration, during the Biden administration, where they just were against energy for being against energy's sake. Can you talk to us about the role of clean energy in the Trump administration?
I can. I definitely want to talk about. I quickly want to touch back on your last question.
Sure.
Which
Let's go there first.
On the map, map. U.S. Geologic Survey is part of Interior. Their job is to go map these enormous resources we have onshore, offshore, and specifically subsurface. And if people don't think that's important, I would encourage people to read this great book that came out in the early 2000s called The Map That Changed the World. And it was a story about this aspiring geologist cartographer in England, Scotland, and Wales, who actually personally between 1800 and 1815 went around and mapped the whole country, all the subsurface acres. And people and here's where the coal is, here's where all the resources are. That led to this century of the UK and Britain becoming a global power. They revolutionized transportation. They had the ability to move heavy objects from A to B with steam trains powered by coal. They could do manufacturing someplace that wasn't next to a river where you needed water power. I mean, it transformed everything. They became the biggest shipbuilder. They projected power all over the world because of one guy and his map. And then later in the 1800s, then Interior, which was formed in 1849, and then later, hey, we should be doing that in the U.S. U.S. Geologic Survey was created. That in many of these executive orders and things that we're seeing where we're taking surface land or others off the map, completely extending beyond the original language in the Antiquities Act to create massive national monuments, which I think courts will find that some of those have gone way beyond the law. In the fine print, it says, oh, you can't even do any mapping. I mean, there was a conscious effort to hide the resources that the American public owns in all these public lands and actually sort of put USGS out of business. So we've got to get back to the mapping business, and that's key because that relates to mine, baby, mine, because we've killed the mining industry in our country over the last 30 years. Just check the number of college graduates we have, the programs that are shutting down, and then what did we do? We outsourced our environmental angst by saying, oh, we'll just buy them all from China. And then China, who does open pit mining, destroys countries like Indonesia, the Democratic Republic of Congo. They use child labor. They use prisoners. They use forced labor. They don't have an EPA, and they don't do any of that. And then they flood the market with low-cost minerals anytime we try to do any here, and then they crush U.S. entrepreneurs that are trying to get in. Meanwhile, so then we wake up and we say, wow, we just had a policy where we were going to subsidize EV vehicles with batteries that came from China when China controls 85% of the mineral refinery, and we're going to tax all of you to create subsidies so that we can buy minerals from them. And now that we're in we've been in a Cold War, we've been in a cyber war with them, we're in a cyber war with them every day, but they're saying, I mean, it's on page 18, but we're going to stop shipping gallium and germanium to the U.S. I mean, they have export controls, and you take the top 20 minerals we need for national defense, for technology, for your cell phones, and we are almost completely reliant on foreign sources, many of those China. So I mean, one of the things that the NEDC is focused on is how do we catch up? I mean, we're in a precarious position when we have just put ourselves in an enormous position of dependence on adversaries or potential adversaries for the critical minerals. So Matt may be Mac, mine may be mine, and then the third one is build, baby, build, is we've got to start building. We've got to build power generation. We've got to build more base load power. We got dangerously out of whack between intermittent, unreliable, expensive versus the affordable, low-cost base load. That endangers our whole grid. So that was those are the sort of the four babies. It's the first time I've heard of that, but I love that.
That's how we that's how we refer to it. It's the four babies, right?
We need to name them now.
Yeah.
Come up with
So I want to go back to that previous question too about the clean energy. How does the Trump administration view itself when it comes to the environment? Because again, I would argue that conservatives are conservationists, right? Like, so talk to us about that balance of clean energy here in the Trump administration.
Well, I think that the word clean got really distorted, and clean meant good, and it meant like a code word for something else. And I think a lot of people thought that there was only two things that were in clean, and that was wind and solar. So take the two things that are highly subsidized and they're also intermittent. And I mean, it's not disparaging. It's just the sun is not shining 24 hours a day, so solar only works. Oh, we'll do batteries. Well, batteries also need to be subsidized, and then you're back buying components and critical minerals from China to be able to do that load shifting. Wind is not inexpensive. It's being sold as inexpensive, but wind only can participate in the grid if we also have base load to operate everything that is happening here, the TVs, the lights, the heat, when we don't have wind. And then wind is often, nobody wants wind in their front yard, so they want it in somebody's backyard like North Dakota. But then if you're going to we did a bunch of wind projects in North Dakota, but then if it's there and we don't need the power because we're already producing more power than we needed in North Dakota, so we become a power exporter. So then it's like, oh, we got to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on the grid to transport this intermittent, unreliable source to a place where they're willing to pay for green energy. And then you throw in offshore, and offshore is like, wind is like 3 times as expensive, and is creating other issues in terms of marine mammals and not in my front yard, and there's a lot of opposition around that. So when I think about clean could be hydro. The number 1 producer of hydro in the country is the Army Corps of Engineers. The number 2 is Bureau of Reclamation, which is part of Interior. That's very clean. It's super, it's great, but you can't build a dam in this country. Geothermal would be considered clean. And then in North Dakota, we were decarbonizing liquid fuels with carbon sequestration. We have ethanol plants that are 100% decarbonized, and that's going to create a fantastic industry around sustainable aviation fuels. So I think people thought liquid fuels dirty and something else clean was like a clean electric. We can have clean liquid fuels, and if you have clean liquid fuels, we can keep using our current infrastructure, because the 200,000 or 300,000 gas stations got built in this country in the 20s and 30s without one dime of federal subsidy. They got built because the market said, here's an opportunity. And we have a oil company in North Dakota that takes all the CO2, they buy it from an ExxonMobil gas plant in Wyoming. They built a 110-mile pipeline. They ship it to North Dakota. They put it down 1980s oil wells, and 40% more CO2 stays in the ground when it's injected, but it forces the oil back up. And then the oil that's produced from that barrel of oil is 40%, there's 40% less CO2, 40% more CO2 stays in the ground than the barrel. So it's a net negative barrel of oil. So there's an oil company in North Dakota that's greener than Patagonia. So you take their oil, and if you want to have 15% ethanol, which has got 0 CO2, theirs has got net negative CO2. You're driving around in a car that has got zero CO2 coming from a liquid engine, and then you have and they're doing all that for a $60 tax subsidy for enhanced oil recovery. The sum of all of the EV charging stations, the EV batteries, the EV subsidies, that was $900 per ton of avoided CO2. It's 900 versus 60. So we say in North Dakota, we say it all the time. I'm saying it in Interior, we say it, and you see it's innovation, not regulation. You can't regulate yourself in an industry that's rapidly evolving with new technologies. This is a super high-tech industry, the energy industry, and we have a pathway to get to zero carbon through innovation, if you want to get there. So there's nothing about what we're doing that says we don't. Hey, if people want to pay more for zero carbon liquid fuels, we can deliver them. We can deliver them right now, and we can deliver them at 15 times less than this crazy idea that we're going to somehow electrify everything. And the reason why, when we create artificial demand for electrifying cars, and then some states and the federal government by executive order said, oh, federal buildings can no longer be heated with natural gas. And they, telling people you can't cook, you can't use propane to heat your home. We're like this attack on U.S. liquid fuels because we're going to do all electric. Well, at a time when AI is coming, and now AI, for the first time in any of our lifetimes, AI is coming, and there's like massive demand for electricity. So the electricity we have to use for the things that we, if you can cook dinner over here on natural gas, and you want that to be low cost, and you're competing against the 5 biggest tech companies in the world that are going to spend $300 billion this year on CapEx projects. And I would say, excuse me for going, I think I'm answering your second and third questions too.
That's okay.
But I read your mind where you're going, but I mean, because there's real demand coming from AI, and the whole time that I was in tech, we used 1% of the nation's electricity. 1%, because it was, PCs were getting more efficient, refrigerators getting more efficient, growth of electricity demand in the US was just growing sort of with population. It was very low. And now comes along AI, and we've gone from 1% to 2% in tech has gone into a thing. We're going from 2 to 4. 4 is going to go to 8. I mean, we're now in a Moore's Law exponential doubling of the demand needed for tech, and we should talk more about why that's a good thing. I mean, because winning the AI arms race with China.
That's really where I want to go next, is the AI. I think it's something like you're looking at like 22% increase in electricity to compete to get these AI data centers up and running. So talk to us about how we meet this demand for electricity. I mean, this is probably why we need to have this Energy Dominance Council and bring everything full circle here, right? Like, if you're going to meet a massive demand for electricity, and then also if we're going to get the copper out of the ground, right? Like, I mean, I've heard stories, some of the folks here, I think, were saying that getting copper out of the ground, it takes decades to get a permit to open a copper mine. So how do we get those things going where we can then meet the electricity demand to win the AI war with China?
Let me just say, yes, it's a fact. I was meeting with a mining company that's been working on a copper mine permit, and they're on year 29 on getting a U.S. copper mine. And we need more copper than ever. But yes, it's beyond the level of absurdity, the obstructions we've done to kill mining. AI is different than any other kind of data center. If you might say, oh, we've had data centers for a long time, there's a bunch of them here in Virginia. I mean, data center, that is processing a shopping order from, say, a large online retailer, or a data center that's processing a health claim, that's it's a thing. I mean, it's like, yeah, we're going to use this big data center, or we're going to do it in the cloud. Artificial intelligence, we take electricity and an AI data center, we manufacture intelligence. I mean, we're manufacturing intelligence. Who uses that intelligence? These are general purpose tools that they'll go to your jobs. Every job's going to be affected. It doesn't matter. Education, healthcare, the law, government, certainly. I mean, government has to. We were trying to add as much AI as we could to the jobs in North Dakota. I mean, if you get an opportunity, in a state government and say, oh, we didn't get all the head count we wanted, the legislature to give us our budget. Well, how would you like to have an assistant that speaks 27 languages, can code, and can write all the first drafts of your reports for you? Well, wow, that's amazing. I don't know anybody that can speak 27 languages. I've never met that person. I've never met somebody who can code but also is really good at writing reports. But then and guess what? It's free. I mean, it's basically free. It's so cheap. It's free. And so we can take, when I looked at it for the government lens, we take every job, get rid of the mind-numbing, soul-sucking work that we ask government team members to do because they're stuck in 1990s technology of permitting and processes and paper and old technology and old systems and business flows that have never been improved. We can take all that, do business process improvement and give them a job that is meaningful and purposeful and actually makes a difference in our country. That's what we can do. And this is the power. And literally, it's like things are unimaginable. Can you imagine 10% GDP? That's possible. I mean, we could have massive increases in productivity with a tool, but a tool of AI. But we need electricity to make that happen, and we don't have enough. And then we have a major power competitor. And China last year China gets 60% of their electricity from coal. The 30% of the world's electricity comes from coal. 60% of China's comes from coal. They added 94.5 gigawatts of coal. 1 gigawatt is Denver. So they added 94 Denvers in 52 weeks. So they're basically opening up 2 coal plants a week at a time when we're trying to shut all of ours down. And if there's a coal plant running in America, clean, beautiful coal, as President Trump likes to call it, which is true, because if it's running today in America, it has survived the 20-year attack of everything imaginable. If there's a coal plant today, they're the cleanest in the world. There's a coal plant running in the U.S. If you care about the environment, you should be insistent that every electron and every ounce, every gallon is produced in the U.S. because we're producing it better, cleaner, smarter, healthier, safer than anywhere else in the world. This idea that we're going to outsource, we're going to shut ourselves down and outsource to other people, that is bad for the environment. At the time of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that began, we were offloading dirty Russian heating oil into New England because we couldn't get a pipeline through the state of New York. And people in Maine, 80% of the homes in Maine are heating their homes today with heating oil. So they're paying more and they have a dirtier fuel source, which is bad for their health and bad for their economy. So one of the things that NEDC is trying to do, President Trump's talked about, we're trying to get the Constitution Pipeline back going again in the state of New York. It's only 124 miles. We have hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline in this country, and a little 124-mile connector that got stopped by a state water permit is the reason why people in Connecticut pay $2,300 more per family a year to heat their homes, because their prices are high. We've turned New England into an island. We've turned it into something like Hawaii, where they can't get access to low-cost electricity and low-cost and clean U.S. natural gas coming all the way from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so Mr. Secretary, we're running out of time here, but the last thing I want to ask you about here to close things out is we're seeing this across the administration, by the way, not just in the energy space, not just in the mineral space, but across the administration. We're seeing leftist activist judges going after President Trump's agenda, and we're seeing it in the immigration space, we're seeing it in the national security space. What are you guys doing at Interior and more broadly throughout the energy space to be prepared for that when that inevitability comes at the various actions that you guys are taking?
Great question, Matt. And you heard me say earlier that there was a whole of government attack on U.S. energy. You're seeing some of the residual of that. So when we want to turn that around, it's not just executive branch. We need legislative branch to create durability for some of the changes that are being made. Lee Zeldin did some heroic work, to basically begin an effort to say we've got to deconstruct an entire regulatory regime, which may have been built on things that were either illegal or unconstitutional. And I say that because, there was a federal ruling that wasn't covered well in December by a federal judge that said everything that came out of the CEQ, every rule, every mandate, everything they did for the 20 years may not be valid because it was never actually created. It was created as a council on environmental quality. It wasn't created as a regulatory agency. So if you look at the founding legislation, everything they may have ever said, the judge said, oh, you're asking me one question? I think the whole thing may be thrown. 20 years of mandates might just get tossed out the door. And then the endangerment finding, which led to the whole idea that CO2 was a pollutant as opposed to a naturally occurring. It's the thing that's the highest percentage of the air we breathe, and it's a major component of all kinds of cool new advances, and from lightweight carbon fiber to for medical purposes, for the carbonation in what you drink. Is it a pollutant or is it a value-added input that we could actually use more of? If the endangerment finding rules that CO2 is not a pollutant, then the whole house of cards built around this idea that our existential threat was CO2 and that we needed to kill our economy and have economic and energy poverty to save ourselves from CO2. People are going to have to really let go of a framework that they've been operating under for decades because it may turn out that the real existential threat we have is Iran getting a nuclear weapon and losing the AI arms race to China. And those are the two things that this administration is determined not to let have happen. And to do that, we've got to have, because in addition to the 94 gigawatts of coal, then China's got 30 nuclear plants going. I mean, you want to talk about clean, nuclear's clean, but we've killed the nuclear with overregulation. And so we've got part of what we're doing is to make sure that we can get nuclear going, get geothermal going, get all these sources that are going. And then China's also building hundreds of billions of dollars of dams. And I mentioned earlier, hydro is a great source. So they're literally going after rapidly without a regulatory state. They will triple the amount of electricity that they are producing in their country, and we might have technology, we might have a 12 to 18 month lead in the AI from a software standpoint, but they can brute force it with more electricity. Electricity becomes intelligence. They are winning the electricity war because of their regulatory environment. They're on path to triple the amount of electricity. We need to think about how do we double ours in our country, but we've got a lot of work to do because we've got the collision of the largest CapEx budgets ever. And by the way, no one has written this story, so jump on it if somebody wants to. But just go out and add up the CapEx budgets of the top 5 companies. It's $300 billion and climbing, and this is a completely new thing. When I was a corporate officer for 20 years of public companies, including 7 years at one of the big ones. I never went to a CapEx meeting from 2000 to 2007. I mean, capital expenditure meeting. As a corporate officer, you would have to sign off on that. Right? It wasn't because I wasn't invited. It was because we didn't have any. You know, you would hire programmers and you hired salespeople, and if you needed an office in Singapore or Munich, you just leased it. I mean, there was no CapEx in what the software models that were 20 years ago. And now the CapEx, that $300 million, that's bigger than the auto industry, bigger than any manufacturing, it's bigger than what oil and gas will spend. And so there's a story out there which is, wow, the largest CapEx spenders came out of nowhere. I'm at this energy conference in Houston at CERAWeek, and the tech guys used to come to sell software. Now they're coming as the biggest customers, and they're like, we need electricity, and we will pay 5 times as much of it. Could anybody produce it for us? And then we have the regulated power industry is like, well, we could do an interconnect study with FERC, and maybe in 7 years we can hook you up. No, by then we've lost. So we've got a collision between a highly regulated industry that it's been moving at the pace of demand, which is slowly increasing, small increases, colliding with the most dynamic industry in the world, the one that's going to help save the US and create our future. And those guys have got money to spend, and they can spend more. The value of 1 kilowatt electricity has never been more valuable than today, and the people that can manufacture intelligence will outbid everybody else. So in that environment, that's a demand signal. We've got to figure out how to build markets that work, because we do crazy things today, like the guys on wind, the guys that are doing the wind business. If it's a windy day, they bid negative. They pay the grid to take their electrons because they can make it up on the tax credits. And then we have days like January 20th, my closing point, January 20th, the day that President Trump just happened to be the day he was being sworn in, but that was the coldest day in the whole, this grid area. PJM is a regional transmission operator up here. They, at 5 a.m. was the peak load on that cold day, and we had 0% coming from solar because it was dark out at 5 a.m. We had 2% coming from wind, and we had 70% coming from thermal fossil fuels. Of all the electricity for 60 million people between DC and New York, 70% from fossil fuels, 22% from nuclear. And you could walk down the street and find organizations here that are trying to kill thermal baseload from fossil fuels, and they're trying to kill nuclear. That'd be 92%. And then, but wind, well, 2%. We paid for it. Germany paid $500 billion chasing this wind and solar dream, and now they produce 20% electricity. They've deindustrialized the nation. The jobs have all left. Electricity costs 3 times as much, and they're producing 20% less, and they became highly dependent on Russia for natural gas. And so when that whole conflict broke out, it was a disaster for Germany and a win in terms of price increase for Russia. We just can't make the same mistake. Matt, you've been, I don't know what, I didn't even have any coffee this morning. I don't know what happened.
Neither did I.
But I was like so excited to be here and so excited to be with you, and I'm such a big fan of you and Breitbart, and then I'm like,
I love it.
I'm completely out of control.
This is the place, this is the place to have this conversation and geek out on energy stuff. So we really appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for your time. I know we're a little over.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Hang on, grab your seats. We'll get rolling on that here in a second. So. We have. Yeah. Hey, do you want to bring? Oh, my mic is still live here, so. I think, yeah, I'll go over here. So. He's an easy interview. He's an expert. So, yeah, he's the. You just fire a couple of questions his way, and he gets rolling. So I think we're still waiting for Frank. I don't know if he. Do we have Frank, guys? Or yeah, Frank. Okay, yeah, well, Franco will join us up here on stage in a couple minutes. Okay, guys, so we're joined on stage right now by Sam Goodaldig and Mike Catanzaro from CGCN. They're our partners here putting on this event. In a few minutes, we'll be joined by Frank Bacchiarola. Will join us here on stage in a second as well from American Clean Power. So guys, first off, your thoughts on what we just saw from the secretary there, both of your reactions to it. We'll start with Mike.
Look, thanks for doing this event, Matt, and thanks for Breitbart, the Alpha Institute, and American Clean Power. It's incredible, and it shows you the level of talent that President Trump has recruited into his administration, especially when it comes to energy. I mean, the team is just, I mean, you talk about energy dominance. You just saw dominance right there in front of you in terms of dominating knowledge of the policy, how to apply the policy, the knowledge to get the job done, and turn this country around when it comes to energy, especially what we've seen over the last 4 years. So again, he covered a lot of ground, and that's what you're going to see from Doug Burgum and the team and the council over the next 4 years. So not a surprise.
Yeah,
Sammy?
I just can't help but compare it to what we just had the last 4 years. We have, someone that has such a firm grasp on energy policy and the lands issue and all the issues involving the whole sector, and compare it to what we've had for the last 4 years, and it's night and day.
Yeah, so Mike, you worked in the first Trump administration, so you worked on these policies then. It does feel like, while we went through a rough patch there for 4 years with Joe Biden in the White House, it almost feels like a little bit of a blessing in disguise that we had an administration in between, because I think that the president and the team around him are clearly thinking this stuff through and have thought it a lot through over the last 4 years, as we've seen the damage that the Biden administration did to American energy production. This time around, they came in guns a-blazing right away.
Yeah, I think the last go round, in 2016, I guess I'll say it, I don't think there was an expectation that, President Trump was going to win. And so I think there wasn't a lot of preparation beforehand. There was certainly a transition team. But yeah, when we came in, we had a lot in front of us. And you need 2 terms, really, when you're in administration. You learn from your mistakes from year to year and from term to term. And so, yeah, we went through 4 years of a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of, raised the issue of litigation and lawsuits and everything else. And so you figure out kind of the moves that your opponents make. And I think when it comes to energy, we know who the opponents are and we know how they operate. We know what they do. They have a lot of money and a lot of resources that they throw at you. And so for 4 years, we took those slings and arrows. And then the interim, where we had the Biden administration and we were sort of all sitting back and trying to understand, all right, if we get back into power, how do we do things differently? We studied the opposition, we looked at the Biden administration, and we looked at what they did. And so again, we learned, and I think we took those lessons learned, and then we put them into a policy agenda, helped out with the transition. The transition was incredible this go around. And so yeah, coming in this time around, it was, guns blazing right from the get-go. So here we go. We got 4 years of this, so it's going to be great.
Sammy, I know a major issue that you were focused on, sir, is how seeing Republicans serve underserved communities. Talk to us a little bit about how what we saw from the secretary here and what we're seeing from the broader Trump administration with American Energy may achieve that goal.
So, we've been talking about these underserved communities and how they absolutely are the base of the Republican Party and have been increasingly so every 2-year election for the last 10. I have some stats. The 20 poorest counties in America, the last time Republicans won a popular vote mandate election was George W. Bush in 2004. Of the 20 poorest counties in America, George W. Bush won 4. Trump won 19. Of the 100 poorest districts, Trump won 82. Bush won 39. Of the wealthiest, Trump won 7 of the top 20. Bush won 17. This trend has been happening. The policies that our party has pursued have been regressive in nature up until kind of Trump in 2016 when we flipped the script. Jeb Bush was the front runner in 2016. Trump started talking to voters from different parts of the country, and we saw it culminate in the 2024 election where he won a popular vote mandate with poorer voters across the spectrum, poor white, rural, Hispanic, black. And the policies that have been regressive have really focused on the energy sector. And that's the quickest, fastest way to hurt the economy and hurt their economies. So it's just really rewarding to see kind of what we've started talking about in 2013, 2014, the conventional wisdom from legacy media that we're the party of the wealthy. It's just not true. There's no stats that prove it's true. The wealthiest counties voted overwhelmingly for Kamala Harris over Trump. So it's really, really heartening to see the party take these voters more seriously. MSNBC, CNN, they can go on rants and raves about how we're the country club Republican Party, we're the party of the wealthy. Breitbart's been on this from the jump, and it's why Breitbart is the most well-read publication with House, Senate, Republicans, and certainly this administration. So the legacy media kind of continues to perpetrate these myths that aren't proven in any way at all. The last time they were true was 20 years ago with George W. Bush. And it's just really rewarding to be able to talk about reaching out to these voters, building new coalitions. The party is evolving, and I don't think the Democrats quite understand what's happening, and they're relying on their friends in the legacy media to continue to tell lies about our voters.
Mm-hmm. So Frank Banchiarola from American Clean Power, thanks for joining us here on the panel. So talk to us a little bit about what you saw there from Secretary Burgum and kind of your thoughts on the broader energy agenda that we're seeing from the president and the administration.
Yeah, look, we represent the clean power sector, wind, battery storage, and solar, about 16% of the power generation in the U.S., 93% of new capacity last year. Our industry is completely consistent with the message of energy dominance. Mm-hmm. We believe that energy dominance means an all-of-the-above energy strategy. We think it was a mistake for President Biden to take vast U.S. resources off of the table. On day one, he issued an executive order on permitting and leasing for oil and gas, and on the way out, he took areas of the outer continental shelf off the table. And in between, we saw massive energy price spikes. We don't want to see the same thing happen to this administration. We don't want to take resources that are U.S., that are domestic, affordable, reliable, abundant, off of the table, raising prices and threatening energy security. So we're going to work with the administration to ensure that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. So are we seeing are we seeing the administration apply that kind of all of the above approach? I think you heard that from the secretary here, is that he was talking about he wants to do all of this stuff. You heard him talk about nuclear, you heard him talk about fossil fuels, you heard him talk about coal, you heard him talk about, I mean, they're kind of doing everything.
We need everything, and we don't need it because of ideological reasons. You know, a lot of times energy breaks down. This is my favorite resource, and we need it because the American people need power. We're told that after 25 years of flat demand, over the next 5 years, we're going to have growth that equals the size of New York State. And then by 2040, we're going to have up to 50% increases in power generation driven by AI, which is a challenge that we have to meet for our own competitiveness, but we need power to do it. And so we need it from everything. And so at ACP, we support an all of the above strategy, and we're going to work with the administration to implement energy dominance in the United States. And it'll be quite different from the last administration, where we saw restrictions on energy.
So Mike, we'll bring you back in the conversation here. So tell us a little bit about, again, that all of the above approach that we see. Because again, we saw that really come together in the first Trump administration. We're seeing it again now. Does seem like they've thought this stuff through a little bit. They know what they're doing now in ways that, you know, not to say the first term wasn't great, it was, but it seems like this one's even better. So your thoughts so far?
You keep going after the first term there, man. No, look, I think when it comes to all the above, you have to look at, the early executive orders that the president signed. And you got to say it, like the elephant in the room, the president has never liked wind power, offshore, onshore wind power. He just doesn't like it. He made that very explicit. And so that's kind of off to the side. I think when it comes to other clean power resources, battery manufacturing, solar, I do think you're already starting to see signs from the administration. Actually, the Interior Department just approved, I think, a right-of-way for a solar project out west. So long as these projects fit within, again, the energy dominance framework, affordable, reliable, clean energy for consumers, the president and his team are going to approve them. And that's the way it should be. I don't think we should be taking any of these resources off the table, because Frank is exactly right, particularly when it comes to the power grid. We have a demand crisis, a supply crisis, actually, when it comes to the grid, and the president was right to declare an energy emergency, which focused a lot on the grid. I mean, if you look at demand growth over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure how we're going to meet it, especially if we're taking resources off the table. So again, I totally agree with Frank that we have to throw everything at this problem, again, or we're not going to meet it. And you mentioned earlier, Matt, the AI race with China. It's all about electricity, as the governor said, as the secretary said. And so, again, all the above is the right way to go. Again, wind, the president just has an aesthetic distaste for it, so I'm not sure how we're going to overcome that. But I think when it comes to the other resources all across the board, you're going to see the administration embracing them.
Yeah, so for each of you guys, I would ask about the AI race, because I think that is one of the things you're hearing. You heard it from the secretary here. He was talking about it quite a bit on his own. I asked him about it as well. You hear it from across the administration. Obviously, the president has made this a major focus of his efforts. You see Elon Musk talking about it. You have the Project Stargate stuff they rolled out at the White House. I mean, they are very focused on artificial intelligence. So how does that factor into the bigger picture here? So, Frank, if you want to kick us off.
I think, Matt, AI is principally driving this demand increase that we're estimating, again, from in 2040, a potential for 50% increase in power demand. And it's a race that the United States absolutely has to win. AI, you heard the secretary talk about the importance of it across our economy, across, whether it's, health medical innovation, or in the energy space. It's critically important. So demand is going to drive the need for an all of the above strategy. I would say also markets do have a way of sort of overtaking policy ambitions. One statistic that I think surprises a lot of people to know is that we deployed more wind during the first Trump administration than we did during the Biden administration. We produced more oil in the United States during the Biden administration than during the first Trump administration. That's not because those presidents were trying to do that, it's because the market dictated it. And so, you know, we believe that the market is sending all of the signals that tell us that we need more deployment of everything. And so we're going to work with the administration to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. And Sammy, you know, you're dealing with a lot of people throughout the administration, throughout corporate America, you know, you're talking to folks all over the world. Tell us a little bit about, is everybody racing to win this AI arms race right now?
Yeah, I think the rub really is, you know, a lot of the tech companies that got very involved in AI made a lot of promises that they knew they could never keep, you know, to be green and completely carbon neutral by 2030. That's not happening. Now, that we're making energy cleaner is a great thing, but look at where these data centers are being purchased and built. They're being built in the poorest parts of the country. So, you know, yes, we should invest in these data centers. Should the people that live in these poor congressional districts and counties see some reward? Because all we're going to do is drive up their energy costs, and they're our base. So we need to take care of these communities in a way that AI helps them get out of poverty, helps build up their communities. Because right now, it's going to be a race to, you know, how do we power these data centers up in these poor communities? I know for one thing, the constituencies that live in these communities shouldn't have to bear the burden of it. Their costs should not go up. So I think that's the rub. I think it's a really interesting political twist. We've got, you know, a lot of wealthy elites that, you know, that love AI, but how are we building it, and what happens to the communities that you know, these investments are being made? Their power costs can't go up.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, same question to you. What are you seeing on this front that we're, you know, not seeing, and what do we need to be focused on AI?
Yeah, I think this is the greatest challenge facing not just the energy sector, but I think the country as a whole, because again, this is about, you know, the technology war with China, and whoever wins it is going to own the 21st century. And so, you know, when I was in the first administration, you know, when you think about upstream oil and gas and what you need to do to help produce more or get more permits or more leases issued, that's a pretty straightforward process. It's not all that difficult. Now, is it difficult in the sense that there are going to be impediments, there's going to be lawsuits, and people are going to try to stand in your way? Sure. But when it comes to the grid and what we're faced with the grid right now and how we're going to fix it, this is a multi-factor, multi-level problem that I've never seen before. And I talked to somebody who's going into the administration at a very senior level at the Department of Energy just the other day ago, and he knows the grid, I think, better than anybody in this town, and it even flummoxed him. He's like, I'm not sure how we're going to solve this problem. You have FERC involved, you've got state PUCs involved, you've got you know, DOE, you've got, again, a whole bunch of different regulatory agencies involved. You've got a lot of different things to unpack here, and we don't have time to do it. We're already sort of behind the 8 ball. And so really what we need is for Congress to step up to the plate. The administration can do a lot of good here, but anytime you're trying to solve a problem in this complexity through regulation, it's going to get difficult because, again, you're going to find yourself in court, and it's going to take you years to get out of court. And so unless Congress really steps up to the plate, I'm not sure we're going to solve this problem in the short term, but I'm confident that President Trump, we've already seen his leadership in early days and working with House Republicans and in the Senate to try to advance his agenda. And this is one where, again, he can really push through, I think, some very positive policies and legislation, because we actually have to have the administration fully on board as well as Congress.
So one of the things we're seeing, we talked about a couple of different other things, major things with the secretary here, but one of the things is the mineral efforts, and particularly with like the copper stuff and whatever. Another thing was what we're seeing from the leftist judges. So what are the biggest challenges that you guys see that, you know, the establishment media, the legacy media are not talking about? What are the the political class, the chattering class, not talking about that they need to be talking about, that are the major challenges that stand in the way of Trump administration achieving this energy dominance agenda? Again, Frank, start with you here. So.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we face is that most people in the public, as well as among policymakers, are taking a sort of antiquated view about energy policy. They're either geographically choosing, or they're choosing one resource over another resource based upon attributes that they favor. And they're not taking into account the fact that we need all of the resources that we have in the US to be able to strengthen our economy, meet our energy demands, and strengthen our national security. And they're also not looking at the demand that we've spoken about that's staring us right in the face that says we're going to need everything. And so we need strong tax policy that incentivizes more energy production, not one over the other. We need it in nuclear, in oil and gas. We need it in renewable energy. We need a strong trade policy that's fair, but that also understands that we're in a global marketplace that requires the exchange of goods across borders. We need a certain regulatory environment. We have not had that for a number of years. That's a major challenge that we face. So when we talk about permitting reform, it should not take 4.5 years on average to get a project going in this country. I went to a ribbon cutting in November for a transmission line that was literally started in the first year of the Obama administration. I forgot because it's so long ago. That was 3 presidents ago. We need that energy now, and we can't be starting projects that we finished 3 presidents later.
Mm-hmm. Sammy, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, I think, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. An unintended consequence of, getting these critical minerals, not from America, come from a lot of countries with terrible human rights violations. So, we had the American left patting itself on the back for a green movement that was fueled by, very sad stories in a lot of, poorer countries with child labor, and it's a dicey issue, and we can do it better here. And I guess what's so frustrating is to watch the left just embrace, clamping down on American resources and the ability to do a lot of this at home, and outsourcing it to some of these countries that have horrible human rights violations. And I think we have the resources here, and we should try to get them from here.
Mm-hmm. And Mike?
Yeah, I think one thing that the media is not focused on, again, go back to this AI issue, is we're faced with this, we're at this very important pivot point where President Trump rightly wants to get more manufacturing back to the United States, expand manufacturing here. But that, of course, increases demand on the electric grid. At the same time, you got AI increasing, demand on the electric grid. And so what a number of utilities are facing is, well, who do we side with here? We have to cut deals with or contracts with the AI, the data centers, or do we go with the manufacturing? And so, again, that tension is very, very real. And the other part of this, too, is the thing that can get in the way of energy dominance certainly is the lack of permitting reform. But the other is the manufacturing capacity we need to actually build the components. I mean, to get a new turbine for a new gas plant, it takes like 4 or 5 years now, I think, to wait. So General Electric, GE, Vernova has actually done a pretty amazing job of trying to step up. I think they announced just recently a huge expansion, again, thanks to President Trump and his policies, hundreds of millions of dollars of new expansion for them. But again, there's just a huge tension there with the grid and providing enough power we can get for the grid, and then not having the manufacturing that we need to make sure that we can actually be energy dominant. So these, again, multi-factor problem here factored into the grid. We have to figure out how to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so to kind of bring this in for the last major thing I'd ask each of you guys is just what would be your advice to President Trump or Secretary Burgum as they embark on, look, we're 50-something days into this administration, we're about halfway through the first 100 days, as they kind of go into the next stages here. So Mike, if you want to start, and then we'll kind of move down the line here. What would be your advice to the president and the secretary as they go on to the next stages here?
Yeah, again, I think it's stay to your true north here, and I think that's one of the great things that we see about this administration. And I think one of the benefits we saw from the first administration is this kind of just lack of fear of not worrying every single day or really at all about what your opponents think about your energy and environmental policies, because the administration has it right. And again, their true north is providing affordable, reliable, clean energy every single day for American consumers, and then exporting the energy we have to our friends and allies. That, again, that's the true north for President Trump and his team. And you can't get knocked off course because environmental groups who are always going to be opposed to you and to try to stand in your way. Again, if they just stick to that, and I know that they will, I think they'll be in good shape here. But I will say also, to stress this point, they do have to get Congress to step up and pass new legislation, whether it's on permitting reform, whether it's figuring out the issues with the grid on AI, because you really can't, as an administration, the executive branch cannot solve these complex problems on its own. You've got to get legislation to lock in rules for the long term, because that's what certainly we're hearing from our clients is they're trying to make these multi-billion-dollar investments over many years, and what happens is now you have administrations, one comes in, sets a whole bunch of rules, new administration comes in and changes them. And with this administration, it's great. We all like the rule changes that they're making. But then if you don't get Congress to lock in those rule changes for the long haul, a future Democratic administration could come in and try to unwind it all over again. So if you want energy dominance now, and if you want energy dominance in the future, you got to lock this in. And again, that's where President Trump and his leadership, I think, can work with Republicans in Congress to lock this in for the long haul.
Sammy, what would you say?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of advice. They're doing pretty good in my opinion. They have a 2-vote margin in the House that's obviously razor thin. They don't have 60 in the Senate, and watching Trump whip Congress is like nothing I've ever seen. There was a lot of talk that Pelosi's the greatest whip in the history of Congress. Tom DeLay is up there as a legend. Kevin McCarthy did an incredible job, but watching Trump just get his way on every single nominee, getting Johnson the speaker's gavel on one ballot, getting that CR through, I'm just impressed. We need to grow our majorities. So, I think the best way we can grow our majority in the House is to honor those voters that gave us the majority in the first place. And we talked about what I think the base of the Republican Party is, which is, these poor, underserved communities turning out, voting for Republicans, sometimes for the first time in their lives. So we got to keep this trend up. There's more voters out there that we can move to our side. We got to get the economy rolling, and I think we can expand on our majorities in 2026.
And Frank, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, my piece of advice is, as you pass tax reform, think about why you're passing it. As Republicans, we've always said that tax cuts stimulates growth in the economy and ultimately raises revenues across the board because you're generating productivity in the economy. Don't pay for tax reform through harming productivity in the economy. The energy tax credits that our industry supports has produced significant hundreds of billions of dollars of manufacturing investment in the United States. 80% of that investment in Republican congressional districts and states that President Trump carried. So don't pay for tax reform on the backs of that productivity and those jobs that you're creating in red states.
Mike Catanzaro, Sam Gidoldig, Frank Mancarola, really want to thank all of you guys for joining us here, and thank you for partnering with us and putting this event on. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys.